Hey everyone, welcome to the Bible Belt Bros podcast. New year, new me, Andrew.
Hey, let's get it.
Today is going to be a fun episode, maybe-ish. We're talking about something that's happened kind of in our church recently, and now we are getting ready, kind of reminiscing on the times we've gone through it before, and probably, if you've grown up in church especially, you've gone through this
Absolutely.
at least once.
Absolutely. Happens at every church.
It happens at every church you go to. So today we're talking about what happens when a pastor leaves the church.
Whether it's a youth pastor or the main pastor, mainly the main pastor, but sometimes it's a youth pastor or the music worship pastor.
Whether they get fired or they retire or they just
pass away. I'll say it, Dusty.
That can happen too. There's plenty of different reasons why pastors can choose to leave a church. I would say most of them, it's usually the fired.
Usually it's scandalous.
Scandalous, yeah.
And those are more interesting. Ours is just kind of dull.
Yeah, it's super dull. I guess I should tell everybody, if Andrew sounds a little weird today, it's because we're in the middle of a church fast, which means that we're not allowed to have water, water till
just
dinner.
Water until 6.
Which for Andrew is his coffee situation.
It sucks.
His coffee drinking habits is gone, so he might feel a little flustered. His brain might be a little kooky, and so don't judge him for what he may or may not say in today's episodes. I just want to put that out there just so everybody knows.
Yeah, I'm not in my right mind right now.
If you're out of pocket on anything, it's the coffee talking or the lack of coffee talking.
Yeah.
But
in a couple weeks, I'll be back to sounding like my old self.
Yeah.
I mean, just listen to last week's podcast.
And if you like this version of Andrew better, then, we can maybe convince him to stop drinking coffee.
No.
Maybe that's the problem. But this past Sunday, our pastor was giving vision for the church, new year, new me. And he made an announcement that I kind of saw coming. We knew that announcement was coming. He was like, don't miss. This is the greatest announcement, biggest announcement. This announcement's huge.
Yeah.
A huge announcement to Sunday.
The greatest, the largest,
the largest, the biggest announcement ever that you've ever heard ever in your life will be this Sunday. Don't miss out. And that was like the worst Trump voice, by the way.
Yeah.
But so he made the announcement that he's been kind of teetering and doing multiple jobs, not just for our church, but helping other church planters. And so trying to balance that and be the pastor of a church wasn't making sense anymore. And so he's taking a step into, you call it a new career. He's not being a pastor. He's still an elder at our church. And so he's still going to be involved in our church, but he is letting go of the reins of the church, which, you don't hear that too often as a reason for people leaving a church.
Yeah, that he was being a detriment to the growth of our church. I'm pretty sure is how he worded it.
You don't ever hear of a pastor saying, you know what, I need to step down.
Yeah.
Normally it's like a part of the congregation going, you need to step down.
Yes, 100%.
So this is kind of a completely different situation, which is kind of like.
And in this case, it was our congregation saying, no, don't step down. And then he gives the announcement and he's stepping down.
He's stepping down. So yeah, it's been probably a whirlwind of thoughts and whatevers, but it's one of those situations that kind of brought up, like, we've been a part of church for most of our lives. Yep. And so we have seen pastors come and go. We have seen how people react and how I've reacted when people have come and gone. And so we just kind of want to talk through that a little bit.
I've come and gone in churches.
Yeah, we want to talk through that a little bit and kind of all the different emotions that can kind of pop up with that, and trying to maybe help you kind of, sometimes it takes us saying things out loud or you saying things out loud to actually then hear it for the first time, because when you kind of think about things over and over again and you don't actually put it out loud, that's one of the 12 steps of recovery is like just saying it out loud is something that can just realize that's the dumbest thought I've ever heard, but you've internalized it so much.
Right.
But when you actually hear somebody saying it, you would call them dumb. If you said something that was not true about yourself, I would call you out. And so now when you say it and you hear it, you calling yourself out. Like, it's kind of like that kind of mentality.
Right.
So, all right, I don't know how to kick this off. So pastor's leaving. What are some thoughts that probably people are going through that you see?
Well, typically when a pastor leaves, again, it's usually under scandalous situations. And so you're going to get usually a multitude of feelings, whether it's anger or happiness or confusion. You're going to get a lot of people asking that pastor, hey, where are you going? We want to come with you. So you're going to get what is called a church split. And again, in this case, I think it's confusion, but also clarification for us, because we've known about this. We've had this feeling for over a year now, almost a year and a half, maybe 2 years. We've kind of been in this limbo of our pastor is only preaching at our church 5, 6, maybe 7 times a year. Our pastor.
That's a little aggressive. There's 52 weeks in a year. He's definitely twice on Easter and Christmas. So but we
right.
operate as a preaching team. So there's
right.
like a rotating 4 or 5 people that typically take the preaching spot on a Sunday.
And that was kind of created so our pastor could pursue this. And now, yes, we did have a preaching team before that. Even at that, it used to be, our pastor would still preach 2-3 times a month, and then maybe have a guest speaker that 4th, or if it was a 5 Sunday month, maybe that 5th Sunday would be a guest. So for our church, it's kind of it's a sigh of relief. We finally know exactly what's going on and what our direction is. And we've always known what our direction is for that year, because at January, first week or two, we always get the same, this is what we're doing this year, guys.
This is our focus. This is our intention. This is our goals.
Right. So we've always known, but now, I don't know. To me, it was a sigh of relief. I've known it. Like, he hasn't come out and told me, but I've known it. I've seen the writing on the wall. It was, I didn't have 100% of the picture clear. And so now with him saying it, now everything's coming in clearer now. So it's nice. And it's it feels good to be able to prepare for the future. I didn't realize that was one thing that was kind of weighing me down. But when he announced it, I was like, finally, thank you.
Now there's a role to step in if you need to step into a role. Now there's just kind of a rejuvenation that happens of, okay, clear mind, let's go forward, let's start making these changes, let's recommit myself to this ministry that I'm serving in, those kind of things that end up happening.
And also what's unfamiliar with this situation is typically a church will have to commit or start a search committee to find a new pastor.
Sure. Yeah.
In this case, our pastor made a recommendation of who he wants to follow in his footsteps, or who he wants to take over the church. And it was a great selection, in my opinion. Fantastic. Fabulous.
The best decision.
The best ever. The greatest.
So we're going to joke like that for the next 4 years.
I think we are.
I
think we are.
Oh, no.
And so it's a great... I'm excited for who he's picked. I don't know if we want to say it or not, so I'll just leave it at that.
We can just say it was the youth pastor stepping into the role of
the lead pastor.
And, it seems like from at least the announcement, everybody cheered, was on board with it. Everybody likes the dude. That's a perk.
Big perk. He's done a fantastic job with our youth ministry.
Maybe they were cheering for people that wasn't. I don't know why people are cheering, but yeah. So it's basically, I guess we could talk about the different ways or different transitions that can happen, because that probably helps with how people end up having to deal with these situations. So for our church, we're newer, we're weird, we do things differently.
Funly.
We do things funly that people might say are, wow, that's pretty crazy. You do that.
Like, what's the name of our sermon series right now, Dusty? This is what I mean. We do things funly.
Okay, our sermon series is called Holy Shift, and it's about sometimes when you're making a shift in something, that shift can stink, that shift can sour.
Sometimes shift hits the fan.
Sometimes just shift happens. And
Yeah.
so
and this is one of those shifts.
And that's what our church talks about on a Sunday morning.
Right.
So just know that going into this context. But when we started this church, however many years ago, 15 now-ish?
Something like
almost,
that. Yeah.
Maybe it's the 15th coming up. Maybe
I think it's,
I think that was part of it.
That is it, yes.
We had things, obviously how all these church plants happen is something bad happened to you in one church. And so you start a new church saying that's never going to happen again,
Yep.
And so one of the things, as we've collectively kind of basically done of all our bad situations and kind of built these bylaws, was that we don't vote on things like that. We have an elder team. We have the pastor is the pastor,
Right,
the pastor is not controlled. He's not like what they say, like the man
puppet.
is the head of the household, but the wife's the neck.
Yeah.
The wife turns the head wherever.
Right.
So we don't have that situation with our leadership where the pastor's the pastor. Really what he says goes, and he has elders to hold him accountable, but more on a spiritual accountability.
Yes.
Not necessarily on a direction.
Our elders can't even fire our pastor. They can call in the overseers. Who then would have to fire. They would do their own investigation.
So that's kind of saved us a lot of drama, to be honest, because what happens in churches is people start having personal problems.
Yep.
And those, like, I'm the deacon and I have a personal problem with this preacher, now I'm going to start being negative Nancy to him and causing all this drama around it, and then makes that pastor not want to be there, and so then it gets into that thing. So we don't have that because there's like basically an outside party. The overseers are not even a part of our church directly.
Correct.
And so we have this situation in place. Like the bylaws, part of it was if he left on good faith, that he would recommend somebody and not go through a start over phase.
Right.
Because of that, I foresee for a while, especially, that we're not going to have the turnover that typical churches would have in this situation.
Yeah, the split won't happen.
Because we can talk about the other way. The other way would be voting, right?
Yeah.
So we grew up in a traditional Southern Baptist church. Andrew
Very
and I
traditional.
both grew up in one. You had a search committee that would bring somebody on, and then you'd have a whole church vote,
right?
Yay or nay.
They would come do
kind of in front of the person.
Yeah.
So it's just awkward. And so that would happen, and the same thing would happen to remove a pastor. Would be that kind of same situation where you'd have maybe the deacons brought it up, and it was, we need to vote whether to keep this guy as our pastor or whatever. And so then that starts having division, just like this presidential election has so much division. It's 50-50, how's half the country believe this complete way and this half the country believe this complete way? It's because we're the size of like 20 countries. But you see all of that, and that causes so much division and so much drama that when a pastor does end up leaving, because they usually don't win those fights.
Never. Because there's usually been closed-door meetings where people have garnered support in those types of situations.
Yeah. And so when a pastor ends up leaving, that 50% of people that are disgruntled aren't going to stay typically, because whether or not they have another place to go, they're not going to keep worshiping with these losers over here.
The people that they disagreed with.
Yeah, and that they're mad at. And so they're choosing either, no, let's go down the road and see what they're doing. I've been kind of discouraged to intermingle with other churches, and so I might as well go see that. And or you have the pocket of people that that pastor is kind of a career at this point, So if you're a pastor at one church and you're no longer a pastor there, you're not going to go try to sell cars at a car lot or any.
Right.
You don't have any other skills that technically apply to any other businesses, even though you do so much.
Right.
Now, though, so they're going to find another church, and if it's close enough, those guys might make the extra 10-minute drive to church, to be with this guy. And so it just becomes like this whole, like, what do they call it? Not a merry-go-round. It's not. I don't know. Carousel is maybe the word I was trying to come up with, where people are just moving, intermingling, moving, and that's why
they're shifting.
It's not a holy shift.
No, definitely not an unholy shift.
To follow God based on their personal preferences is kind of ends up being what happens. And I obviously do that. I go to my church because of personal preference, because of relationships,
Right, yeah.
I've tried going to other churches, and I've tried to make a holy shift, and it just didn't feel holy, so I didn't leave. You know,
I went to another church a couple weeks ago.
Well, okay. Well, you sinner.
Yeah,
That's why our pastor's leaving. Because people like you don't come to church on a Sunday unless he says, it's the biggest announcement ever.
That was Don't Go Church Sunday. Actually, it wasn't. It was House Church Sunday.
Okay. Well, you still went. Oh, you didn't go to. I didn't go either. I was camping, though. I was on vacation.
Oh, see, I went to a church that was doing their grand reopening.
Okay. Holy.
And I wanted to see it.
I did multiple churches because I go to house church every week as well. So I already see them the next day. So there's that way that it happens. And so there's a lot of chaos, a lot of division. You shouldn't have fired this person. They haven't done anything worth being fired. You're basically firing a guy because you don't like what he says on Sunday or how he's saying it on Sunday.
And those get ugly because you see screaming matches. You hear cursing at each other in the cafeteria.
You see the unmost holy shift.
Yeah.
In those kind of meetings, open door or closed door. And think now, like, we're talking about things that have happened before social media has been this huge thing. Think of all, like, the posts that make you kind of read into it.
Yes.
More all those generic, like, I can't remember what they call those, but vague posts the vague book, that's what they do. And those vague posts that they put out, like, really wish something would turn around, you know, or something like that makes you, who are they talking about? What are they talking about? You know, that's kind of
my. Yeah, I'd probably get nasty now.
Yeah, now.
I know you're talking about me in that post.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so when we talk about somebody personally, we don't post the episode for like another 3 months before.
Yeah.
So they've forgotten about it.
We've forgotten about it.
And we might offend somebody else that we weren't even talking about on the podcast because we're now in a new situation.
Right.
But
we've shifted.
Like that was about this other person. What is the right response? Because I think you do have a validation of being hurt.
Absolutely, you do.
I think you do have a validation of, I mean, it's your pastor. And if you feel like God, that's always been the weird thing, right? When most people and most pastors end up not being a pastor, like, God called them to a church, and then people remove them from the calling. But who's in charge here?
Right. You know? Exactly. Well, so people think people are in charge.
Exactly. So what is the right response? Like, how should we, what is your opinion? I mean, these are just opinions. There is no, like, none of us are pastors. We don't know.
Nope.
But what is your opinion on how we should handle? Yeah, there was a holy shift in my life, or unholy shift in my life.
Yep.
What is your opinion that how we should handle this situation?
I personally, I really think our pastor did a great job in handling this. There was no turmoil. People were sad and upset, caught off guard, but those are just the people, in my opinion, that didn't want to see this happening, and so they were just ruling that out.
Well, I want to give our pastor also a encouragement. I'm really bad with words today. I need coffee. Maybe I'm the coffee guy.
Yeah, maybe you need the coffee.
Holy crap. Anyway, he doesn't listen to this podcast, probably for good reasons. But
you'd be surprised. He has listened to a few.
So I don't know if I should say this or not.
No, say it. You have to.
I'm actually really proud of him.
Yeah.
On how he, I was expecting an announcement of some sort to be coming like that, but I expected him to hold on to
leadership. Control.
Yes, a leadership role. Like, I expected him to be renamed or retitled into like a oversee pastor or
ultimate pastor.
Something that would allow him to keep the reins, because you know what?
He started the church.
He started the church. It's been a vision that God has called him to for the past 15 years, and really 15 plus longer, if you think about it. And so for him to just say, here's the keys, which is what he's doing, and I'm still going to be here and be present on what's going on. But like, he could have put himself in a role where it's like, hey, I'm just kind of an overseer, but like a weekly overseer.
Yeah, if you mess up, I can remove you.
If you mess up, you still got to do the things the way I want it done, those kind of things. And so, a youth pastor is going to come in, and they're going to do things that a senior pastor is not going to want,
absolutely.
And so for him to be able to say, I'm giving it up and not trying to retain any kind of power role is ultimately like kudos on him, because
absolutely.
That is probably, I would think, the hardest thing to do. Like, running a business and it being my babe, that was my baby, and trying to like give that up. Ultimately I couldn't be a part of it anymore, but but it was because like this was my baby, and now my baby it's no longer my baby. It's been adopted 7 times over, and like this is not the vision I had for this thing. And so stuff like that might happen, and it's probably going to hurt, but like the way that he's handled it and how he's released it, I think deserves a lot of credit.
Absolutely. I mean, this is really how it should be done, in my opinion. Can it always be done this way? Not always. Sometimes there are just some stupid things that pastors do that require them to be removed.
I mean, most athletes don't, they don't retire until they're a year too late.
Right. Yep.
A lot of pastors don't retire till maybe 5 or 10 years late.
Right. Absolutely.
To be able to, not that he's retiring, but to be able to make a shift like that.
And some would argue in his prime, because he still brings good messages.
I mean, if he's not in his prime, then that means I'm getting closer to not being in my prime. So
dude, let's just face it, we're not.
Yeah. I wear hats so the kids think I'm cool, but when I take it off, they're like, holy crap.
Yeah.
But in other situations, so let's put the scenario out that a pastor's removed. You like the dude. We've had that situation happen to us.
Absolutely.
Really like the dude. As a student, though, and I think if we're thinking of the same person, then we were still youth at the time, and so we were like, what's with all this drama? Like he's fine. Our town is only 7,000 people. Like, how many people are you expecting to reach every week?
Right.
And so to deal, like, how in that situation, how should we go about dealing with the removal of a pastor?
Yeah, and actually, so in that scenario, I remember going to the business meetings as a youth because we were members of the church, and so we had a voice. And so, and when your youth outnumber your adults, I mean, you kind of.
Fun fact, this is not why Rusty got fired. But at that same church, I remember he took all the youth because there was more youth than adults in the church. He took like the 80 youth people that were up there on a Wednesday night for a Wednesday night business meeting because we really needed a church van.
Yep.
It was like. But that, yeah, exactly. Like you start putting stuff to a vote, and then I think they tried to start validating, like, you can't vote on certain things unless you're 18.
Yes.
Even though you're a member.
Tried.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that fight didn't go over very well either.
But yeah, so, I think there's a justifiable reason to be upset along with the person who got fired, the pastor. And I think there is a justifiable reason to want to continue following the pastor if you believe God has placed him in that role specifically for you.
Yep.
That the people that hop around with the pastor aren't the bad guys in these situations,
Nope.
Always. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are leaving in a very combative way, and maybe it's how they're leaving, not why they're leaving. That's kind of the issue in those situations. But yeah, I just don't. It's hard. That's the part, because it's hard because there's a shift happening, right? And it's like one party of the church is taking control.
Right.
And then you got the other party that's supposed to show up on Sundays and pretend like none of this is happening and that we,
Yeah.
But then we serve the same God and are supposed to be following the same Holy Spirit, that we should all be in unison in some aspect or another. Maybe not necessarily on like how loud the music is, but those things aren't reasons to fire anybody. So it would be more of like, what's the holy reason? Like, what's God's actually saying?
Right. What's the spiritual reason that you're wanting them to be gone?
So if you're going through a situation like that at your church, or potentially going through, what can we do to prepare for it? And I'm thinking, like, right now we're going through a fast. Just, it's the first of the year.
Yes, we don't have energy to be angry.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, that it's a good part of fasting is being able to reflect, to pray, to focus a little bit. Every time you hit a hunger pain, it pops that thought in your mind of I should be praying about this, or I should be thinking about this, or meditating on this. And so maybe before you jump to conclusions, or before you jump ship at your church, before you get super angry and start cussing people out in a Christian way, even, bless your heart, then maybe you should take it to God first.
But maybe you should just always do that.
in everything, yes. But especially in this situation, like if it was, there's some people that might still like, I don't know if I like the new guy or whatever. And, they might even not know the youth pastor because they don't serve in the youth. And so, so there might be a thing about that, and they're like, maybe I should check out at other churches. And I think that's okay in some aspects, unless you feel like God's called you specifically to this place or under this person. I think it's okay to somewhat go to churches that you are preferenced for,
right?
That your preferences align with, but that shouldn't be the sole purpose of what you're doing. Like for me, there's other churches that my preference might aligned with, maybe my convenience would aligned with, but I didn't have the personal relationships at those places, and I'm not going to invest in personal relationships in new places, so that was our reason of continuing to stay. But there was like a season of time for me, just nothing bad happened at our church, but I still needed to be like, I needed to see what was out there, so I'd stop thinking the grass is greener and truly pray about it, discuss it, talk about it, and then come to the decision, okay, I'm going to stay here, so now I need to invest here, was kind of the mentality, the shift that I took. But it started with that prayer side of it. And like, if you're going to go church shopping, as they call it, do it in a prayerful way, in a holy way.
Not in a vengeful way.
Yeah, not like trying to see like, what's better about this place? Oh, I like the coffee better. Don't become that guy. Like there's, every place is going to have their things. And if you've worked at churches or worked in areas where you can see behind the curtain more, it's ugly no matter where you go.
Very ugly.
Just this closet might be clean, but the kitchen's dirty over here.
Yep.
There's always going to be something. And so just know that
no church is perfect. People aren't perfect.
And wherever you decide to plant yourself, be planted. Don't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and be planted. And when you're going through a shift like this, I would say don't jump ship. Like we're doing like a long transition that most churches won't have when this is going on. But don't make a starting tomorrow we're going to start trying other churches. Like
give it a shot.
Give it a shot. Chance. You might not know. Maybe this was a holy shift and you weren't listening.
Right.
And so maybe this was a good thing and you didn't pay attention to God long enough and to the situation long enough to actually see it through, and you just tried to react. And now because you reacted a certain way, now you got to be that person that doesn't fix that reaction. And you can't come back because then you got to admit that you're wrong. That's what Andrew does all the time.
Absolutely.
Andrew will have an argument, and if he ends up being wrong, he drops it. He never comes back to bring up the argument again. No, he goes on to the next thing that he's right about.
Exactly. But if I'm right, I'm going to bring it up every week.
But if he's right all the time.
All the time. I'm never wrong.
Yeah, so we're just kind of being open a little bit about what's going on in our lives. We probably figured you guys have had some of the similar situations. We'd love to hear about kind of how you've handled the situation or any ideas of churches we could go to. I'm just joking. Churches, things that you've done on for your church, and maybe even just ways that you've handled these kind of situations, or even your structure of your church would be kind of interesting to hear about how you can live. And if you've ever, I think we're the only pastor that I know that besides retirement or death has on their accord chosen to leave step down, and not on a negative accord. So I'm interested to see how this is different than a lot of things. But thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you in the next episode, I guess.
Take it easy.